Hi Jackie, thank you so much for being a guest on Radio GPS. We appreciate you giving us your time today. My name's Isla and I'm joined by Ronnie and Aliyah. For those of you who don't know, Jackie is an award-winning Australian author and we're currently reading her books in class.
Jackie, when did you decide to be an author and what inspired you?
I was bored. I was 6 years old and it was a Sunday afternoon and I'd run out of things to read. So I decided I'd write a book instead. So I wrote a book and it was about a haunted horse called Tressus. And I got hooked. I discovered when you write a book, you can write exactly the book you feel like reading. Exactly the people, exactly the places. You can go anywhere, do anything. I showed it to my teacher. My parents didn't like my writing stories. She showed it to the headmistress. The headmistress had a copy printed off for all the kids in the infant school. And after that, if the class had behaved, I was allowed to tell everyone a story for the last 15 minutes of every school day. And that was very good practice for becoming a writer. So yes, that's when I started writing books. But I didn't send my first book away till my early 30s. Everyone except my grandmothers and 2 teachers who'd really encouraged me had told me I was wasting my time writing. Go and do something useful, girl. No one can make a living being a writer. And so I used to write in secret. I loved writing. I kept on writing, but it was in secret. And it wasn't until I was absolutely desperately broke. I had about $7.20. I needed $144 to register my car. I was living in a shed in the bush with no electricity, no running water. And I really needed to have a car in case I needed to take my baby to the doctor. And so a friend who I'd secretly told that I did write said, look, why don't you send something off to a publisher and see if you can earn some money that way? So I sent a book off to Angus and Robertson, a story to the Canberra Times, 2 articles about farming to farming magazines. And at the end of 3 weeks, the book had been accepted. I got a fortnightly column in the Canberra Times and a monthly column in each of the farming magazines. And I was earning my living as a writer. And that's how I've supported my family ever since.
Thank you for answering.
Pleasure.
What was your first book you have ever written, and what is your favorite book from your collection written by you?
Well, the first book was probably Tressus, but the first book that was published was called Rainstones. And they only accidentally looked at that. I was using an old typewriter I'd found at the dump, and the wombat used to leave his droppings on it every night. And that meant the letter E was all soft and squishy. So I had to write it without using the letter E. And when I'd finished, I had to write all the E's in biro. But also, I'm dyslexic. My spelling is terrible. And back then, there were no spell checkers. So when the editor looked at it, she gave a shriek of laughter and said, this is the messiest, worst spelt book I have ever seen. And she thought only someone who was very stupid would have sent in a book like that. So she took it out into the main office to read a bit aloud to everyone so they could laugh at this really, really, really stupid writing. And she read the first paragraph. Then she read the first page, the next page, and the next page. And then she stayed there till 6 o'clock. Everyone just sat there while she read all of the book out to everyone. And then she went back into her office and offered me an advance to publish it. And that's how it got published. If it hadn't been such a mess, if I hadn't been so dyslexic, if the wombat hadn't left his droppings on the typewriter, I might not have been a writer now. They may never have actually read this mess that I'd actually sent into the publisher. My favorite series, though, is probably the Wasp Matilda series. I'll probably never write my own autobiography, But this series of 9 books, so every book is an individual. You don't have to read all 9 of them or read them in sequence. They pretty much contain all my life, even though the places have changed, the names have changed. Actually, the places haven't changed that much, but the names and the people and the time. This starts in 1892, and I'm not that old. But I think the Matilda saga is always going to be the closest to my heart.
Thank you for answering that question.
Great plan.
Are you currently writing anything? Can you tell us about it?
Oh, always. Actually, the one that's just come out, Ming and Hilda Lead Revolution. One of the things I love about history is often people lie deliberately. What we think happened in the past isn't what really happened. And that's the case with Ming and Hilda. This is the series about the girls who changed the world. Girls as young as 10, 12, 14, who literally have changed the world that we know now. And this is about the girls who started the Australian wool industry. Now, I was taught at school that Australia's wool industry was wonderful, and that's how we earned most of our money until the gold rush. And that's completely false if you look at the records. The merino sheep that were bought were these horrible straggly things because there was war with Napoleon and most of the good sheep had already been eaten. They got very low prices for the wool because it was dirty, it was full of burrs. The sheep had scab, which was a disease that affected the wool. And so they got almost no money for the wool. It wasn't until a woman went to the King of Saxony, which was very wild back then. It's now part of Germany. And she had gold coins sold in her petticoat. And she convinced the king to sell her a small number of incredibly good merino sheep. And she not only brought those sheep to Australia, but she brought the girls who knew how to shear the sheep. Because back then in Australia, the bloke sheared the sheep by grabbing a bit of wool like that, taking a knife and hacking it off, then throwing it on the ground. In Saxony, girls had to dress in big headdresses like that, and they weren't allowed to go outside. Nice, modest women never went outside. But poor girls had to work looking after the sheep to earn enough money for a dowry, the money to pay so they could get married. And these girls came out to Australia so no one would see the shame of them having to work outside with the sheep. And these girls taught the men how to wash the sheep. They taught them how to use a special lotion to get rid of the scab. And more than anything, they showed them how to shear properly, using shears and taking all the fleece off as one single fleece. And within a few years, they were making a lot of wool. And we had magnificent merino sheep. But it was all due to the girls. So instead of saying, click go the shears boys, click, 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 it should be click go the shears girls, click, click, click. Probably very few or none of the girls actually went back to Saxony. In Saxony, they had very limited lives, and they had to do exactly what their male relatives told them to do. In Australia, every bloke wanted to marry them. There were these wonderful women who knew how to look after sheep and could shear sheep properly and knew how to make cheeses. And for the girls, there was this incredible freedom and all of these blokes who thought they were all wonderful. And not only that, they had a choice of husbands. So they married into families, and most of the families they married into were either wealthy or became very wealthy because the women knew how to judge sheep and they had good sheep studs. But then came World War One. World War One, anyone whose ancestors were German was interned, not just put in prison, but often beaten or even killed. The conditions were absolutely terrible. And anyone whose ancestors had come from Germany was interned. So to protect their kids, their grandkids, and their great-grandkids, they went through the archives and the libraries and all the records in South Australia to remove all the records of these girls. But they didn't remove the records in the annals of the South Australian Company, which was the company which has started the colony of South Australia. And that's the story of these girls, how Australian war was absolutely terrible. Then along came these absolutely fantastic girls, and they taught the blokes how to shear. And by the way, there's lots of other adventures, and there's hairy-nosed wombats, and there's a kid that gets lost in a wombat tunnel, and all sorts of other things. But that's the most recent book.
That's very interesting.
We have been reading Grim Crimson Convicts in class linking to our convict unit. Was it difficult to write Grim Crimson Convicts?
No, I always knew I was going to write it. That was one of the other books that I always wanted to write because what I'd read in history at school was wrong. By the way, what you're reading in history at school now is right. But back then, we were told all sorts of stories about convicts starving and things like that. And I knew it wasn't true because I had the diary of my great-great-great-great-grandmother, who'd been one of Australia's free settlers. And she'd written about it. Every day she wrote in her diary. I had letters from back then. They were scared of starving, but they weren't starving. In fact, if you read Surgeon White's diaries, he said it was the most healthy place in the world, the Sydney colony. He'd never known people as healthy as the convicts in Sydney. So I always knew I wanted to write what it was really like in that early colony. And that's where Tom Appleby, Convict Boy, comes from too.
Thank you for answering that question.
Pleasure.
How has dyslexia changed your journey as a writer?
I have no idea because I've always been dyslexic. If I hadn't been dyslexic, possibly they wouldn't have bothered to read my first manuscript. They were getting so many books they didn't have time to read them all, but they'd never seen spelling like mine. I've no idea what it's like not to be dyslexic, but there is something though I have got from being dyslexic. I've become very, very determined. If you're dyslexic, you've got two choices. You can give up. You can say, I can't do it, it's too hard, I can't do it, it's too hard. Or you can become determined and very focused. And if the first person who tries to help you doesn't help, keep looking until you find someone who can help you learn to read. Because unfortunately, several of the methods that teach kids to read aren't very effective, but they're ones that will teach every kid to read. So if the first method doesn't work, yes, be determined. Keep looking until you find someone who can help you. But being dyslexia, you get a superpower. You can either give up or you can be focused and determined. And it is harder when you've got dyslexia to learn to read and to write in the beginning. But afterwards, after a year or two, it's easy. But you've also learned how to focus and be determined. And the difference between being good at something and being brilliant at something is being focused and determined. That's why so many really successful people are dyslexic. They're the ones who decided not to give up and to keep working at it. And so by the time they left school, they were soaring like eagles, and they did absolutely brilliantly. So look, I wish I could say it would be easy to begin with. It's not. If you're dyslexic or you've got dyscalculia, which is problems with maths, which I've got too, yes, it is going to be hard in the beginning, but it will get easy. And also, it's your ideas that are important. When the publisher was reading my manuscript, it wasn't hard for me, it was hard for her. It was her problem, not my problem. My job is to write the stories. It's other people's job to correct my spelling. I still spell very, very, very badly. So badly that often the spell checker makes a mistake and puts in a different word, not the word that I meant. A few weeks ago, I sent a friend a text saying, I'm bringing you up a Camry for your birthday. A Camry is a kind of car. I meant to say, I'm bringing you a cake for your birthday. But luckily, she knows I'm dyslexic, so she wasn't disappointed when I didn't bring her a new car for a birthday present. So look, I'm still dyslexic. I still can't find my way out of car parks. No one can read my writing easily, including me. It is a scrawl. But that doesn't matter. Computers can spell. Computers can type. Computers don't have imagination. Even artificial intelligence, the most powerful artificial intelligence, has only got what we put in there. We are the ones who've got imagination, and that's much more important than how neat your spelling is.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you.
What are your other hobbies other than writing?
I love cooking. I love gardening. I really love mooching about the bush. I love playing with my grandkids. I really love reading. But I don't really regard any of them as hobbies. They're things I enjoy. I love writing. I do write because that's how I make my living, but I would write even if I didn't get paid for it. I love writing. I love cooking. I love feeding people. I really enjoy feeding people lots of food. So yes, watching wombats, watching the birds, and just mooching around the bush. I love doing that, particularly in the late afternoon when the sun is low and the shadows are out and all the animals are out and starting to eat. That's one of my favorite times of the day.
Who would you like to see us interview on our podcast next?
Ooh, I'm not sure. Leonardo da Vinci.
Thank you for answering
that. Look, I know you won't be able to interview Leonardo da Vinci. It'd be fascinating if you. It'd be wonderful.
Anything else we might have missed or you would like to add?
Look, probably don't worry if you find the books boring. Most books are boring. You need to find the ones you like. The last time I went to a bookshop, I only found 2 books I wanted to read. I don't like books about cricket. I don't like books about politicians unless they've been dead for at least 40 years. I don't like books where one guy sort of kills 1,000 innocent bystanders to save the world. I don't like fantasy unless it's written by my 5 favorite authors who just happen to write fantasy. There are so many books I don't enjoy. So you need to learn to find the books that you do like. Look at the covers. You really can tell a book by its cover. Read the blurb. Does it look like a book that you might be interested in? If you're interested in nonfiction, then go to the nonfiction section in the library. Don't force yourself to read fiction. Read the books you love. And if you're reading it and it is boring, don't keep reading. It is not going to snap your fingers off if you but also don't be scared of reading a big book, even if you're not a very good. If you can read a sentence, you can read a paragraph. If you can read a paragraph, you can read a page. If you can read a page, you can read 140,000 pages. But also, you don't have to read it all. Probably 1 in every 4 books I read, I think, oh, that was wonderful. I really love that, but I've had enough. And so I turn to the end and I read the end and find out what happens in the end. Now, you can't do that with the books you're set at school because those are specially set So you get ideas of the whole different range of the way people write. So you absorb their techniques. Those books are carefully chosen, not necessarily because they're the kind of books you're going to love, but so you learn the techniques in them and you learn the entire breadth of the way people can write books and what books are out there. So, sorry, you do have to finish the books you're set at school. But when you read books for yourself, only get the ones that you're fascinated with. And by the way, if you think all books are boring, just wonder why so many people read books. But books are good for you. Books make you more intelligent. Books give you a bigger vocabulary. The more you read, the better you do at school. But no adult ever reads because a book is good for them. We read because it's fun. So you have to just discover the secret of reading easily, finding the books you love. And often it will be the bigger books that are the most exciting and fascinating ones. Because often kids who don't read very well are just given little skinny books, which are really silly and really, 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 really boring. Don't be scared to have a big book, and never, ever be scared to put it down, say, this is boring, and get another one.
Thanks so much for your time. We have loved having you as a guest on our podcast show.
It was an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.